Let's get started with Tim Merel.
Hello. I'm Tim Merel, founder and CEO of Itouch Reality. We're developing a mobile social VR and AR platform, and DigiCapital, a sell-side and buy-side M&A advisor for AR, VR, mobile, and games. VR could be big, AR could be bigger, and take longer to get there. But there's almost as much confusion as there is excitement about the market. One of the big questions is business models. How are folks going to make money from all of this? We forecast that hardware, e-commerce sales, mobile network data and voice, and advertising could generate over 80% of all revenue for AR and VR in 5 years' time. So it might not look like what you expect, and it's not all about games. So let's dive in. With hardware, it's the strategic high ground with platform changes. And VR and AR is the fourth platform change after PC, internet, and mobile. And folks like Facebook, Samsung, Sony, Google, even Apple with the Metaio acquisition know this, and Apple's proven it's a devastating effect in the mobile market. We think there'll be in the low single-digit hundreds of millions of units installed base for VR and AR in 5 years' time, everything from solutions like Google Cardboard all the way up to high-end Magic Leap and mixed reality, with price points from free up to around similar prices to today's smartphones. So we forecast that $4 of every $10 spent on AR and VR in 5 years' time will come from hardware. Then moving across to e-commerce, you'll all have seen Alibaba leading the $843 million round into Magic Leap at a $4.5 billion valuation. Now, why would a Chinese e-commerce company pour hundreds of millions of dollars into a Florida hardware startup with no sales? Well, they, like we, believe that e-commerce could be the largest non-hardware revenue stream for AR and VR, selling things to folks in totally new ways and taking $2 of every $10 for AR and VR in 2020. Then we move on to mobile network, data, and voice. And YouTube has said that it takes between 4 to 5 times the bandwidth to stream 360 video versus regular video. So somebody has to pay for all that data. On the mobile voice front, that'll largely cannibalize existing mobile voice, and there I mean voice with quality of service, not voice over IP, but the telcos will still be there. So we think more than $1 of every $10 in 2020 will come from mobile network data and voice revenues. Then into advertising, and as the market scales and starts to get into the hundreds of millions of users, the advertisers will come in at scale as well. So we think that will generate $1 of every $10 in 2020. Then we start to move into business models that make more sense for games. In-app purchases. We think that the bulk of downloads will be free. So there'll definitely be a place for premium apps that I'll come back to. But in mobile and other spaces, in-app purchases, whether it be speed-ups, vanity items, and so on, will be a strong revenue model, particularly for games. From there, we then look into the enterprise space and B2B. Actually, let me move into subscriptions, where folks like Hulu, Netflix, Spotify have shown that people will be happy to pay month in, month out for either premium content or ad-free services. Then into enterprise and B2B, whether it be medical, military, education, construction, broad range. We think more AR than VR will be strong business models, and B2B, where the middleware players will also generate some revenue. And lastly, into premium apps, where again for games, we think it's a good business model, because you've already got an audience of folks who are used to paying up to $60 for their fun. So for the high-end immersive experiences with the high-end platforms, we think it's a great place for games. So in the round, what does all this mean for games? We forecast that around $10 billion could be generated by games from VR and AR in 2020. So if there's a discussion about how big could games get, what can it achieve, we think 10 is the magic number. That's the thing to talk about. So lastly, before I finish, at Itouch Reality, we're hiring senior engineers, so if you know anybody who wants to help us build the future, come and talk to me. Thank you.
Very nice job. Big round of applause for Tim Merel. Let's bring up our next speaker, Sam Barlow of Interlude.
Hi, I'm Sam Barlow. I've spent roughly 20 years trying to figure out how to tell a story interactively. In 2015, I released a game called Her Story, which was kind of the culmination of a lot of that thinking. Now, Her Story didn't have a mega budget. In fact, it probably had the smallest budget I've ever worked with. but it managed to capture the attention of a very broad audience. And in fact, it reached an audience that traditional games have previously failed to reach. Her story was kind of a distillation, a very extreme take on a lot of the lessons I've learned over the years about interactive storytelling. The main thing I've learned about storytelling in general is that I think the number one thing that matters to people about a story is how real it feels to them. And this is different to kind of realism. This is, does the audience believe the characters? Does it believe the world of your story? This is the most important thing to the audience. And if you think about the fact that games are in creating virtual reality, then it seems like games should have this down pat. Now look, I started out thinking, similarly to a lot of people, that telling a story in a video game was probably a new form of storytelling, a very different form of storytelling, a revolutionary form of storytelling. And if you look at like the modern 3D video game, we allow people to explore in real time these 3D worlds that are detailed recreations. They are these virtual realities that you can step into. We are able to put the player directly in the story. And so this feels like this should be the holy grail. Nothing can be more real than this. But as I've learned more about story, and as I've explored more and more amazing digital worlds, I've come to realize something. I've realized that the most powerful engine that we have at our disposal is the imagination. And this is wired directly into our survival instinct. We believe our imagination, we fear our imagination, we act on our imagination, because sometimes it can be life and death. Like back when we were little mammals scurrying around, if we saw the grass moving and we imagined that there was a snake in the grass, then we should believe that and act on it because it could be life and death. And so this is hugely important to us. We spend more time living in the world of our imaginations than we do in the world that's in front of our eyes. So ultimately, the imagination is always going to be more real and more powerful than anything we can put on the screen. This is something that classical storytelling knows. All classical storytelling forms leverage and use the imagination. And yet in games, as time goes on, we spend more and more money, we invest more and more ingenuity in trying to take over the job of the imagination, trying to do things that normally the imagination would do. And I think for storytelling, this can be poisonous. Another thing I've learned is that ultimately all storytelling is an act of compression. Ultimately, every story comes down to an attempt to tell the life story of a character. So we take the huge, messy thing that is an entire human lifetime, and we try and compress it down into 2 hours of a movie or a 3 or 4 hour book. And this is, I think, what's wonderful about classical storytelling. It's a way of experiencing a more intense, more concentrated version of life. And that's what makes it magical. If you take, for example, cinema is a great example for me. You look at cinema, and this is a medium that is built around the idea of taking a visual record of an event and then broadcasting it across a screen. So the very first movie was footage of a train arriving at a station. It was literally that. It was a single shot of a train pulling into a station. But as that medium evolved, as it became a storytelling medium, as it became an art form, the real craft in making a movie is what you don't put on the screen. So you might cut from location A to location B. You might have a cinematic montage. A character walks into the room, you only see their feet. You see a character's gaze staring off, but you don't actually see what they're looking at. You can have a very intense character moment between two characters. We don't hear what's going on their head, but we read it in their expression. And I think that as well, the idea of performance, is an incredible tool for storytellers. An actor is one of the most powerful forms of compression we have. You can have an actor training for years at their craft. You have a writer who can spend years coming up with character details, story details, putting them on the page and then compressing them down to a single expression. And the actor can then invest that, put it on the screen, and the audience uncompresses it with their emotional intelligence. And it's hugely powerful. That lives in your brain and becomes more real. What does this mean for video games and for VR and for AR? Well, for me, it's very important. Just because we can put everything on screen, we shouldn't. We need to leave space for the imagination to do its work. We need to embrace genre. Genre is this wonderful tool where if the audience understands genre, they have this toolkit and understanding, they know the rules, and so they can fill in the space, they can build a story with you, the creator. We need to show less so that the audience can imagine more. Thank you.
Great work, Sam. Excellent job. Please welcome to the stage Don Daglow from Fourth Ring Inc.
So thanks very much. I'm going to actually tell you a story that is not really about underdogs, but I'll explain the contradiction in a moment. My main work is, as it has been for a number of years, advising teams working on games in PC and mobile and working in production, game design, and strategy for their games. But I also serve as the volunteer president for the Academy of Interactive Arts and Sciences Foundation. And we offer scholarships and mentorships for students who are planning careers in games. And we've had the chance, by doing that now for a number of years, we've learned, I think, some important things. We're now in our third year of matching mentors with scholars whom we send to programs. So in addition to giving financial support, we also match them with mentors. And this year, for the first time, really just more than 2 years after we started the program, we had scholars come back who were planning games careers and started out as scholars working with mentors in our program. And they came back for the first time and served as mentors to other students. I think that illustrates how quickly we can create change and we can start to build the chain of people helping people. You know, when we think about global warming, or we think about world peace, we can think, well, if hundreds of millions of people collaborate, we can achieve change, and we can do it on faith. But there are places in life where we can achieve change without having to collaborate in the millions to see it. There are places where you can do one thing as one individual and make change that you can see. That's the most fulfilling kind of thing at all. What we have seen for our mentors is that kind of fulfillment, because even as we take these young people who are planning careers in games and we give them these links and we give them this accelerated opportunity to launch their careers into the games business, we are also giving the mentors a chance to reignite something inside themselves that they gain from that. So I think that's the lesson we're learning. We rotate mentors and scholars so that instead of just having one relationship over a period of time, scholars will actually work with multiple mentors with a variety of experiences. And I think that's been part of the program. So here's my ask. It doesn't take a lot of time, whether it is with us. There are other organizations that are also organizing mentors with scholars. But I would ask, volunteer with somebody, find one of these scholars through one of these programs, and sit down and help some of these individuals, because it will both give back to you and it will help them. But most importantly of all, we are in a position where for our industry to grow, I've done this 45 years as a gamer. With that span of history, I've had the chance to see how things happen over time. And one thing I've seen is when we don't pay attention to the future, when we don't think about where we're going, we tend to trip and fall. And the future is going to be built by bringing in continual stream of great new minds, great young creatives, great young business people who will continue to build on the foundations we've set. And we also need to have that growth. We need to have the face of our industry look like the face of the audience we are trying to reach. And if we want to grow our audience, which we still need to do to grow this business, we have to make the colors and the gender and everything else about this industry look like the people we are trying to reach. Otherwise, we will not achieve that growth. And the fastest way to do that is through mentoring the promising young people who want to come into this industry and achieve that goal. So whether it's with our program or somebody else, volunteer, talk to any of us, and help craft that future, and you'll have the chance to see that. That's why I don't think this is underdogs. I look at the students who are now studying for careers in games, and I don't think of them as underdogs. I think they are the best and the brightest. We just have to make sure that we give them that opportunity so we as an industry don't ignore our own future and turn ourselves into underdogs. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Don. Let's bring up to the stage Kathy Astromoff of Twitch.
Hey, so I am here to encourage you, us all, to stay close to your community. So why this topic? It's very dear to my heart. I spent a lot of time thinking about this personally as well as professionally. Come up with a bit of a thesis, which is that the closer you are to your community, the more commercial success you'll have, and the more professional satisfaction you will have in your life and in your job. So, okay, what's a community? No, we are not going to do the dictionary definition. We'll do this. Here's some examples. People who play games, not a community. Twitch broadcasters, arguably a community. Speedrunning Twitch broadcasters, definitely a community if you've ever watched. I encourage you to go check that out. Here's another example. People who work in the game industry, not a community. Game developers, arguably a community. Indie game developers, definitely a community. So with those examples in mind, let's think about the commonalities there, right? Basically, a community is a group of people who have a shared interest that they are, more or less passionate about. The more passionate you are about it, the closer you are to the center of your community. And I wrote the word underdog this morning before I knew this was the theme, so lucky me that I tied in. A lot of communities are formed by nature of being the underdog. So if you think about how game development originated, they were a bunch of nerds who had the privilege of working on very expensive mainframes and dared to do the silly thing of making those mainframes play games instead of doing like space simulations or whatever, right? So why should we care? Well, the closer you are to community, the more likely you are to have commercial success. That's my thesis. This is informed from two experiences of mine, broadly speaking. One is in my time at UBM, which is the parent company of GDC and Gamasutra. I had the privilege of running two groups that were really strong and tight with their communities. One was the game group, who runs GDC. The other is the Black Hat group, who runs an event for essentially hackers, right? Security researchers. What distinguished those groups from other groups at UBM is that they were the teams who ran those shows were of their community. They participated in their community. They invited those folks to their weddings, right? They were in the mix on all the kinds of things that changed the community, and they were trying to help shape the community for the better. They also set up significant feedback loops, right? To make sure that the community and the product were one. My other lived experience on this comes from working with developers, and you guys will hear from Rami at Vlambeer later this afternoon. I strongly encourage you to go listen to what he has to say on how developers who are tight with their communities succeed. The biggest innovation here is letting your community of players see your development process from the very beginning in very transparent and sometimes extremely painful ways. The closer you get to that, the more likely it is that you will find an audience with your game going forward, right? So why should we care? The other reason. Well, it's just highly personally satisfying, right? When you're an actual member of your community, it's really rewarding to be not just at the table or listening to the conversation or watching on Twitter, but actually participating in the conversation about vicious debates, right? About the changes that happen to the community and what do they mean for us. In that instance, that's the only silver lining I can think of about being yelled at on Twitter, right? Is that you're passionately engaged with the issue at hand with people who also care about it as much as you do. Why else is it rewarding? Well, you can contribute to your community's ups and downs. You have them at your wedding. You have them at your kids' birthday parties. You're contributing to folks' GoFundMes when they're in trouble. It's a really rich way to live your professional life. So in short, basically, how do you know when you're close enough to your community? Well, I wrote this down very early this morning, when you work every day amidst the human glitter and the human grit. That's the alchemical process that turns your work into an opus. And if you achieve that, you can achieve everything else. Thanks for listening.
Thank you so much, Kathy Astromoff. Please welcome to the stage Amy Jo Kim, CEO of Shufflebrain.
Hi there. Check, check, check. Sibilance. So I am a social game designer and an entrepreneur and a startup coach. And I wanted to tell you a few things I learned and really crystallized recently in my 20 years working in the games industry and also in the product industry. So I have been blessed enough to work on a handful of breakthrough innovative hits with long-lasting appeal. Not just one, but several. Started with eBay, Ultima Online, The Sims, Rock Band, Covet Fashion, lately Happify. How many of you have played one of those games? Right. So I also worked on a bunch of products that weren't breakthrough hits. I was the VP at a startup, a virtual world startup. My own startup was not a breakthrough hit. Lots of my clients, I'll be honest, made a lot of mistakes, watched a lot of mistakes around me. And I noticed that all the breakthrough hits had three things in common. And most of the projects I worked on, who were run by brilliant people with great ideas, didn't have those same things in common. Do you want to know what they are? Okay. The first is that you start with your hardcore superfan, early customer audience. You get them to help you bring your game to life, and then you expand from there to reach your addressable market. I have seen so many startups and game companies make this mistake that they want to do something innovative and they want to reach this broad new market, but then they start there. They don't realize that first, because of innovation diffusion theory, crossing the chasm, etc., first, you have to bring that idea to life and test it in rough, raw form, not with your larger addressable market, but with your early superfans. Second thing I learned is that it builds on that. True innovators, the people that actually create breakthrough hits, not breakthrough ideas that fizzle, they are tinkerers. They prototype uncomfortably early. So I'm building on what other people have said. And when I was a younger, less experienced game designer, I chafed at the bit. It's like, why are we building all these rough little prototypes and testing them with people that aren't our addressable market? Why? Why can't I go build the cool stuff? Which brings me to the third thing. So it turns out that those early prototypes, lots of small, high-learning experiments, to use lean startup language, is a huge factor of success. So if you prototype uncomfortably early, you're finding out as much about what's wrong with your idea as what's right. Absolutely key. And the third is also related, which is all the successful teams I've ever worked with brought their idea to life from the inside out, from the core loop out. They identified that key, repeatable, pleasurable activity that on day 21, day 60, day 90 would be bringing you back. And they started by bringing that to life with a simple feedback loop. Not fancy progress, not fancy onboarding, which can fool you into thinking you're further than you are. Every innovative team did that. And so when I look back recently, I put a step-by-step system to actually implement these key habits and shortcuts into an online masterclass. So I really had to consolidate my thinking. And now I want to tell you about what happens with breakthroughs. I found that if you actually do these things, if you prototype uncomfortably early, bring it to life with really your hot core, and then build that core loop, you will have breakthrough moments in your game design. You will reach the point where you're getting brutally honest feedback on your key ideas from exactly the right handful of people. And it's that one thing, that even though it's uncomfortable, even, I would say especially since it's uncomfortable, that is the common phase that every breakthrough hit with long-lasting appeal I've ever worked on followed. I helped Covet Fashion, who are great game designers, do this. And it was incredibly uncomfortable, I have to tell you, showing our really early rough ideas, but it helped us focus on something we knew people would love. And that game, which I worked on right at the start, turned into the biggest hit CrowdStar's ever had. 3 years later, it still has 3 million monthly actives and its own division of the company. Thank you.
Thank you so much.